precisely 1 week after our last meeting when it comes to the raid's population and performance and meta of the specs. We are now at the end of the first week of 11.1.5, 8th week of the season in total, and we're now back to looking at the results of the specs, not just after the patch but also after now the second week of the balance tuning that happened. Now the first thing to notice when it comes to the results, the performance of the specs, is something quite cool at the top. We have the differences, the yin and yang, the polar opposites, because we do have at the very top Affliction, Destruction and Assassination. These three specs have something in common, and what they have in common is that they are supposedly the three worst DPS specs in single target. As per simulations, these three are definitely terrible. What is also interesting is that as per simulations, Devastation and Marksmanship and Frost Decay, three of the other specs at the top in the overall results in the raid right now, are also some of the best single target specs. So we have the two polar opposites of the theoretical results in practical real-life situations. Now obviously single target sims and overall damage in the raid are two completely different things, also because bosses tend to not be just single target dummies. In fact, as we know, practically every boss in the raid besides Sprocket has elements of AoE or adds or multi-target situations. The first thing that is interesting to notice in these results is that Assassination, being at the very towards the top of the results, even if supposedly it is the weakest single target result in simulations, if you look at the damage to bosses, Assassination is actually still first. One of the major benefits of Assassination is that they don't really care too much about how many enemies there are in there to do their job. For example, take Rick, where Assassination is also towards the top. Rick does have a bunch of add spawns, right? They're also pretty good spawns for melee because they're quite close, they are easy to AoE down. So this top login Assassination, if you look at their damage, you see that, you know, all of their damage is centered on targeting Rick, right? Practically they're doing no damage to the adds. Even if you are a boomer old school player and you're like, I remember Assassination doing AoE damage or even funnel damage in single target by using Rapture on multiple targets and then Garrote on multiple targets and then benefiting from their passive, giving them energy every time a bleed is ticking to then funnel all of that resource in single target. It's not even the case in here, right? If you look at the actual damage done to the adds, despite Assassination basically not targeting them once, Assassination is first. Assassination is first because while doing their chill, comfy single target rotation, Caustic Spatter was taking care of the rest, splashing 40% of your poison damage, which includes obviously Envenom, as part of your AoE total damage, and that's how Assassination ends up having so much overall damage in all of these fights with multiple add spawns, because they can continue to do their single target rotation, while some of these other specs have to decide, do I use an AoE ability or a single target one? Do I use Rain of Fire or Chaos Bolt? Do I use Divine Storm or Empyrean Hammer? Or even do I go for single target talents or AoE talents? In the case of Assassination, this is their benefit, doesn't really matter too much for them, which is a pretty good kind of damage profile to have to show up nicely in overall results. The other cool thing at the very top is the presence of Warlocks. We have all three Warlock specs in the, I believe, top 11 of results, with Affliction being the overall first, and also by quite a good margin compared to the other specs. Now, these do different things. So Destruction is here really for a handful of fights. Destruction is here because of Cauldron, because they can stay in the middle and hit both bosses with Havoc. Destruction is also here, they can do a reasonable job also on One-Armed Bandit, even though that's the fight for Affliction. They can still use Havoc during the add spawns to do decent damage, and then they are here also for Magzi, where Destruction is very high up in results. That's because on Magzi, Destruction is pretty much carrying the damage of the electroshockers spawning. That's because most of the time the electroshockers will be spawning in Africa. So you have melees not even bothering actually going there, and the range not gaining enough value on cleaving a target so far away from the other target. It's not even good for multi-dotting specs because they don't even gain nearly as much from only dotting one other enemy. So the real value will come from the Destro Warlocks using Havoc on that shocker. That's why they get to soak up so much of that damage and show up so well in the overall results of Magzi. That's really where they shine, on these handful of bosses. The other results, the pure single target of Sprocket destruction is the worst in the game. You look at something like Styx, destruction is in the bottom 4 specs. They are unironically losing to Augmentation Evoker. That's just enough. You look at even the first boss killed by thousands of players and pugs and whatnot, destruction is in the bottom as well. So they really just excel in the handful of fights where there is enough spawns of ads, but not enough ads to turn it into flat out AoE, and only low count enough targets. Affliction is where you get more benefits when the targets become more than just a couple. So, of course, the clear example here is One Arm Bandit. The other example is Rick, where Affliction is also doing very well. You also have Gallywix. Gallywix does have decent ad spawns for Affliction to also be doing well in this kind of fight. So for Destro, it's lower count ad spawns, for Affliction is higher count ad spawns. Affliction also does gain, more benefits if it is on your typical 1 minute spawn, which is perfect for One Arm Bandit, because of course, you can even see from their casts what they plan to do: Phantom Singularity, Malevolence, Soul Rot, and once every other one of these, the 2 minute cooldown of Dark Lair. That's it. That's all you do, right? Prep your max soul shards, make sure you have a proc of Tormented Crescendo for your free Malefic Rapture, and then place down all your CDs, including your potion and your trinket, and then just spam Malefic Rapture. That's the thing. And then 1 minute later, do it again. That's the plan for Affliction on multi-target. The third one that should complete this cycle perfectly, so low target ad spawns, multi-target ad spawns, pure single target, would have to be Demo. Technically speaking, Demo does have pretty good results in single target in terms of simulations. They are doing decently well. It doesn't show up nearly as much though. Sprocket, pure single target fight, Demo is not doing particularly well, but really there haven't been enough situations where the spec of choice to play in a given fight for Warlock as a whole was Demo. Because as we mentioned, Cauldron is perfect for Destro, and then Rick is perfect for Affliction, and then you have One Arm Bandit for Affliction, and Magzi is for Destro, Gallywix is back to Affliction, so there isn't much room for Demo to be the main play. In this case, it is the one on pure single target of Sprocket, but that's about it. That's basically the only room they have in this tier to shine over both Destro and Affliction. However, what if you wanted the straightforward better spec? Because we just said this spec is good, but on certain fight profiles, this other is good, but it depends on the ad spawn count. The one that though has been very good, regardless of the kind of fight you're in, overall it has to be Devastation. Devastation, whether you start early on a fight like Vexy, Devastation is doing very well. One of the worst results, ironically, is on Sprocket, which is pure single target. You go up to One Arm Bandit, Devastation is 3rd. You go up to Magzi, Devastation is like 4th or 5th, and then you go up to Gallywix, Devastation is 1st. So consistently throughout the bosses, Devastation is the one that overall has had the better results. Almost all of the fights are played as Flame Shaper, besides the obvious One Arm Bandit that you play as a Scale Commander, very simply because Scale Commander gives you the triple Disintegrate Beam, which is very good on a fight with a few ad spawns. Besides that, otherwise you default to just playing Flame Shaper and making use of your Engulf. Engulf is similar to the value of Assassination in the sense that you are using this for single target. This is still obviously part of your single target rotation, but On single target, on Galli, this did almost 400 million damage, but then you look at the overall damage of Engulf and it's about, 70% bigger because of the extra freebie damage you still get to do with Engulf by simply hitting the adds. Another benefit is the same with Eternity Surge. It's not that you were actively using this in AoE, you were still gonna cast this in single target and it happened to hit a bunch of adds. Same goes for Fire Breath. You were still using this in single target, you just happened to hit a bunch of adds. That's also one of the good benefits of playing Devastation, very similar to playing Assassination. Basically the same stuff you were going to be casting in single target ends up hitting and ends up benefiting you in multi-target situations. This is the other highlighted spec right now. We could say the better one overall in terms of results, in terms of more complete power across all boss fights. Other than being like a Warlock, for example, where you say, I can be useful on One-Armed Bandit, but pretty much terrible on Gallywix, or, awful on Sprocket, but very good on Magzi. Devastation is more of a stable, good pick for all of the bosses. Now we can update once again. As we said, we checked this week 1. There haven't been any changes in week 2, so we have the confirmation that the buffed specs haven't really increased their performance that much, related to Elemental being buffed, for example, or Balanced Druid being buffed also, for example, are still doing quite terribly towards the bottom. And also that despite the many buffs to augmentation continues to be quite far detached from the rest of the specs in terms of results. And also, but it should come at no surprise, at this point Arcane has started to surpass Fire in terms of overall results. After yet another round, this time of buffs going the way of Arcane has now been played. Because the other problem, of course, of Arcane, whenever we mention these things going back to 11.1, isn't just if your spec is being buffed or not, but if you have 5,000 players or if you have 44,000. Chances are many of the Hall of Fame, top 100, top 50, top 20 guilds mage players are playing Fire, meaning that the average skill level for the top results of Fire are much higher than the ones for the top results of Arcane. But if you now go into 11.1.5 and you look at the parses, now the difference isn't 4 versus 44, it's 6 versus 18. So Arcane players are no longer 1/11th of the Fire Mage players, they are 1/3 of the Fire Mage players, which is a much tighter gap. As for the other bigger change in, of course, balancing, a couple of weeks ago we had the Giga nerfs to Discipline. Now, bizarre to call them Giga nerf, as we just look at the results and we still see Discipline being first. However, as you can tell from the lines yourself, this line is nowhere near this line, right? This gap, even changing them to actual numbers, this gap was 2.8 mil from the average around here, which was 2.63. So it was it was like a 170k HPS difference before this patch. After, now you have, for starters, Discipline being practically at the exact same level as Mistweaver and Resto, and even the ones below, like Preservation, which is at the same level as these other two, is only roughly 80k HPS instead of 170k HPS. So it has reduced dramatically. Practically no difference from these three, and these three are only about 3% ahead of these three. So it's a now much tighter gap amongst the specs. The only one lagging behind still by a little bit is only Holy Priest, but it's definitely a much more balanced situation compared to what we had by just a couple of weeks ago. This will continue to slip in favor of non-disc specs, as we mentioned every time, deep into A tier, as burst healing becomes less and less valuable because bosses are being nerfed and you are being buffed. We are getting 3% more healing every week, and we're getting more item level every week, meaning that there is less and less to heal. And who gets damaged the most when there is less and less to heal are the specs that do burst healing, meaning Discipline and Preservation Evoker are the two specs that would lose more going deeper into A tier. But this nerf definitely had the results intended in putting Discipline back in line with the other specs. There was no need already to put Discipline back in line in terms of popularity as usual. Even when being super meta, Discipline is still remains not one of the most played specs anyways. But with this though we have our overall recap of what's been going down in the raid amongst the more relevant things. We looked for today at the specs currently doing best towards the top, and it's more interesting and more exciting rather than looking at the depression that are the specs underperforming or doing somewhat poorly towards the bottom. Now, we were surprised there was zero balance tuning or zero retouching at the release of patch 11.1.5. In this upcoming reset there will also be absolutely nothing, so it's now time to move our cope angle to next reset and start wondering if we will see any change by the time we get our next weekly reset. But for today though, on this Tuesday, we are now done. We can start our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting Competitive for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching, see you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime... Oh, well, good thing the front case of my bike randomly opened today, because I just noticed my bike revision has been out of date by only 4 years. So, yeah, better renew it quick.